an unknown man appears in a corrupted kingdom. He has no army, no wealth, not even a retinue behind him. He carries only a voice that does not tremble. He confronts a king, stands against priests, and calls down fire from heaven upon a mountain. That man is Elijah, and his story begins with a drought that brought all Israel to its knees. The kingdom seemed secure under Ahab and Jezebel. Palaces gleamed, markets overflowed with life. But behind the splendor lay a nation that had abandoned the God of its fathers. Jezebel had installed the priests of Baal and filled the land with pagan altars. The people accepted the lie that Baal controlled the rain and the harvests. In the midst of this idolatry, Elijah appeared. He brought no titles, no letters. He declared before the king that there would be no rain until further notice. It was a direct challenge, not only against Ahab and Jezebel, but against the God they claimed to serve. There will be neither rain nor dew in these years, except at my word. The word was fulfilled. The sky shut down, and what seemed like disbelief soon turned into despair. Grass disappeared, livestock died, rivers dried up, and the sun cracked the land apart. Families rationed water. Farmers fixed their eyes on the heavens, waiting for a cloud that never came. The name of Elijah became a whisper of fear. Some cursed him. Others believed only he could reverse the tragedy.
The fields became desert. My children begged for bread, and there was no grain. Every day we looked to the sky, but it was empty. They said it all began with that man, Elijah, that only his God could bring back the rain.
While Israel suffered, Elijah was secretly provided for. By the brook of Cherith, ravens brought him bread and meat each day. When the water dried up, he was sent to Zarephath in Sidon. There he found a widow preparing to die with her son. She had only a handful of flour and a few drops of oil left. Elijah asked her to share it, promising that God would not let it run out until the rain returned.
This is my last bread. We will eat it and then wait for the end.
Do not fear. Do as I say. The Lord promises that the flour will not be used up and the oil will not run dry until the rain returns. The woman obeyed, and the impossible happened. The jar never ran empty. Later, her son died, and in tears she blamed Elijah. The prophet prayed with insistence, and the child came back to life. The news spread. The God of Elijah not only controlled the rain, he also had power over life itself.
Elijah was not extraordinary in himself. What made him different was that he acted in the name of God. The drought in the flour showed that Baal had no power. The resurrection of the child revealed that life itself was in the hands of the Lord.
3 years later came the decisive moment. God ordered Elijah to present himself once more before Ahab. The place chosen was Mount Carmel, where pagan altars stood and the people gathered to witness the challenge. The test was clear. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices. The prophets of Baal would call on their God, and Elijah would call on the Lord. The God who answered with fire would be recognized as the true God.
"Answer us, Baal! Set this sacrifice on fire!"
They cried out from morning until evening. They jumped, cut themselves with knives until they bled, crawled on the ground. The people watched, but nothing happened. The altar remained untouched. The crowd murmured. No fire, no answer. The priests exhausted themselves, but the heavens stayed silent. Then Elijah stepped forward. He repaired the Lord's altar with 12 stones, arranged the wood and the sacrifice, and ordered it to be soaked with water until a trench around it was filled. If fire came, no one could doubt it.
Answer me, Lord, so that this people may know that you are God and that you are turning their hearts back again.
The air grew still. Fire fell from heaven, consuming the sacrifice, devouring the wood, disintegrating the stones, and drying up the water. A blaze of light blinded all who stood there.
We fell to the ground shouting, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" It was not human fire. No one could invent it. It was the answer from heaven.
That day, Elijah became the most feared prophet in Israel. He had confronted the king, humiliated hundreds of priests, and proven that the Lord rules over all things. Mount Carmel was marked as the place where heaven answered with fire. But the victory did not bring rest. Jezebel, enraged, swore to kill the prophet. The news spread quickly, and Elijah knew his life was in danger. The man who had called down fire from heaven now had to flee into the desert. Elijah walked away from Carmel. Behind him lay the smoke of the consumed altar and the echo of the people's acclaim. Before him stretched an uncertain path, overshadowed by the queen's threat. The prophet of fire, who once brought flames down from heaven, was now about to face the darkness of fear and solitude. After the fire on Mount Carmel, Elijah seemed to have reached the peak of his mission. The people had recognized the Lord. The prophets of Baal had fallen, and the mountain still burned in everyone's memory. But the victory did not last. In the palace, Jezebel swore to kill him. Her words were no empty threat. She had hunted and executed many prophets before. If she said Elijah would die, all Israel knew she could make it happen. Elijah understood he was no longer safe. The people remained silent out of fear of the queen. The prophet who had called down fire from heaven now had to flee alone, with the feeling that what he had gained on Carmel was collapsing around him.
May the gods punish me if by this time tomorrow you are not lying with the prophets you killed.
Elijah ran south, leaving Samaria behind. Each step took him farther from the crowd that had once cheered him and closer to a desert that would consume him. He walked an entire day until he collapsed under a solitary bush. His exhaustion was not only physical, the threat had plunged him into despair. There, beneath that broom tree, he spoke the bitterest words of his life. He asked to die. The same man who had defied a king and humiliated hundreds of priests now confessed himself defeated.
Lord, I've had enough. Take my life. I am no better than my father's.
His voice, once thunderous and firm, faded into a whisper of defeat. Elijah wanted it all to end there, in solitude, far from everyone. But God did not let him die. An angel touched him and showed him freshly baked bread and cool water. Elijah ate, but lay down again. The angel woke him once more. "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Elijah obeyed. And with the strength of that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights until he reached the mountain of God, Horeb.
They said Elijah crossed the desert like a broken man. He was no longer the prophet of Carmel. He walked as a fugitive, sustained only by the bread the Lord gave him.
Horeb was no ordinary mountain. It was the place where Moses had seen the burning bush and received the tablets of the law. For Israel, it was the symbol of meeting between man and God. There Elijah arrived, not as a strong deliverer, but as a man hiding in a cave. In that refuge, he confessed what he felt. "I have served with zeal, but Israel has abandoned your covenant. They have torn down your altars. They have killed your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they want to kill me too." It was the confession of a man who believed he was the last faithful one in the nation. He expected God to respond with power, to confirm his mission with signs as great as those on Carmel. A powerful wind tore through the mountain and shattered the rocks. But God was not in the wind. An earthquake shook the ground, but God was not in the earthquake. Then a fire raged with violence, but God was not in the fire. Elijah watched each phenomenon with expectation, but none contained the presence of the Lord. And then, after it all, came a gentle whisper. Barely a breath, almost imperceptible. The prophet covered his face with his cloak and stepped out of the cave. That silence, filled with divine presence, was stronger than any fire or earthquake. There God spoke to him.
"Speak, Lord, here I am."
The message was clear. Elijah was not alone. God reminded him that 7,000 in Israel had not bowed their knees to Baal. The prophet had felt unique, carrying the whole mission on his shoulders. But the truth was different. Faithfulness had not disappeared completely. God also gave him new tasks. He was to anoint Hazael as king over Aram, Jehu as king over Israel, and he was to find Elisha to walk beside him and eventually succeed him. Elijah's mission would not end in loneliness or defeat.
Elijah learned that the Lord does not depend on spectacular displays. The wind, the earthquake, and the fire represented human expectations, but God chose the whisper. It was a lesson for the prophet. God's work is not always dramatic, but it is always real.
Through that encounter, Elijah understood that the victory on Carmel had not been the end of his mission, only a step. The fire had shown God's greatness, but the whisper revealed his closeness. The prophet's strength would not lie only in visible signs, but in obedience to that quiet voice. Elijah left the cave with renewed conviction. He no longer asked to die. He knew he must return. He had to continue his task, confront a kingdom still under Jezebel's shadow, and above all, prepare Elisha, the man who would walk at his side until the end.
"The Lord still has a path for me. I am not alone. His voice continues to guide my steps."
The journey back would be different from the flight. Elijah had entered the desert in fear, but he left Horeb with a renewed mission. Jezebel's threat still remained. Ahab's throne was still standing, but the prophet was no longer paralyzed by terror. Elijah had learned that God does not always reveal himself in great spectacles. Sometimes the most powerful is revealed in the simplest, in what is barely heard. That lesson prepared him for what was coming. The meeting with Elisha and the beginning of a new stage in his ministry. Elijah returned from Horeb with a new certainty. He was not alone, and he still had a path to walk. The Lord sent him to find Elisha, a young farmer who would become his apprentice and successor. From that day on, Elisha walked with him, learning from his words, observing his actions, following him as disciple and witness. Time passed, and Elijah knew the end of his ministry was near. He sensed he would not die like other prophets. Deep inside, he carried the conviction that his departure would be different. That certainty filled him with silence and drove him to prepare Elisha for the inevitable.
"Stay here, Elisha. The Lord is sending me further ahead."
As surely as the Lord lives, I will not leave you. Wherever you go, I will go with you.
Elijah tried to leave Elisha behind at several stops, in Gilgal, in Bethel, in Jericho. But the young man always refused. He would not abandon him in his final steps. Together they reached the Jordan, the same river that centuries earlier had opened the way for Israel to enter the Promised Land. Elijah struck the waters with his cloak, and the river parted in two. They crossed on dry ground, just as the Israelites had in the days of Joshua. It was a powerful sign. The same hand of God that had once guided the people was now accompanying the prophet to his final destiny.
We saw them walk toward the river. Elijah stretched out his cloak, and the waters parted. We had not seen anything like it since the days of our fathers. We knew something great was about to happen.
On the other side of the Jordan, Elijah asked Elisha what he wanted to receive before his departure. The young man with steady voice asked for a double portion of his spirit. He did not ask for wealth or power, but for the spiritual inheritance of his master. Elijah replied it was a difficult request, but not impossible. If Elisha saw him when he was taken away, then it would be granted. Elisha understood that he must remain attentive, his eyes fixed on every movement of his teacher.
Master, I beg you, let me inherit a double portion of your spirit.
You have asked a difficult thing, but if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be granted.
They continued walking and speaking. Suddenly, the sky opened in a brilliance beyond description. A chariot of fire with horses of fire descended, and in a whirlwind Elijah was taken up. The ground shook, the wind roared, and Elisha stood looking upward, unable to contain his astonishment. Elijah did not die, as other men die. He was not buried in a grave. He was taken by God in a whirlwind before the very eyes of his disciple. His departure was as extraordinary as his life, marked by signs that never left anyone indifferent.
My father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel.
Elisha tore his clothes in grief. He had lost his master, but he had witnessed a mystery reserved for few. Elijah's cloak fell to the ground, and Elisha picked it up. With it, he struck the Jordan again, and the waters opened as before. The prophet's spirit had passed to the disciple. Elijah vanished from the earth, but his legacy remained. His life did not end in a tomb, but in a whirlwind that carried him into the presence of God.
Elijah is one of the few men in the Bible who did not experience death. His departure in a chariot of fire made him an eternal testimony. That is why his name appears again and again in the hopes of the people. If he did not die, then he can return.
The news spread. In Jericho and Samaria, rumors circulated. Some said Elijah had been taken up, others that the Spirit of the Lord had transported him to another region. 50 men went out searching for 3 days, but they found no trace. The prophet of fire was no longer on earth. The memory of Elijah was etched into Israel. His story did not end with his disappearance. His figure became a living enigma, a prophet who never died, a man carried directly into the presence of God. For many, this was not an ending, but the beginning of an expectation. Would he one day return?
We searched in mountains and valleys. No one found his body. Then we understood he had not died, like the others. The Lord had taken him.
Elijah left no tomb, no remains, only a cloak, a disciple, and a memory that would endure through the centuries. His story nourished the hope of generations. Some imagined him returning on the day when God would settle accounts with the world. Others saw him as an eternal witness that the Lord has power over life and death. His disappearance was not the end. It was the seed of expectation. Elijah, the prophet who faced kings, who closed the heavens and opened them, who called down fire, was taken up without seeing death. In that mystery was born one of Israel's most powerful beliefs, that Elijah must return before the end. Elijah vanished in a whirlwind of fire and horses. His departure left no tomb, no body. What remained was the memory of a prophet taken by God himself. For Israel, that absence did not mean an end. On the contrary, it opened the door to a new hope. If Elijah did not die, he must return. Centuries later, the prophet Malachi announced that Elijah would come back before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That message ignited the imagination of an entire people. His figure was no longer just the past, but also the future.
Behold, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers.
The announcement was not forgotten. Generations of Israelites grew up with the expectation that, at the end of time, Elijah would return. Every drought, every invasion, every catastrophe rekindled the question, is this when the prophet of fire will appear? Elijah became a symbol of restoration. He was not seen as a simple messenger, but as the herald of the end, the one who would prepare the people before judgment. The memory of his extraordinary life made his return believable. If he was taken without dying, then he could also come back.
In every generation, we have remembered the promise. When the day of the Lord is spoken of, Elijah is always mentioned. He did not finish his mission. He will return to complete it.
Time moved on. Israel fell under empires, from the Persians to the Romans. And in the midst of that history of subjugation and hope, the figure of Elijah did not disappear. Scribes, rabbis, and families spoke of him as if he were still alive, waiting for the command to return. During the celebration of Passover, families began leaving an empty chair and a cup of wine set at the table. It was a sign that if Elijah came that night, he would find his place prepared. The tradition was not born of empty ritual, but of the conviction that he would be the messenger announcing final redemption.
This chair is for the prophet Elijah. If he comes tonight, he will know we are waiting for him.
The centuries darkened Israel with wars, exiles, and oppression, but Elijah's name never faded. In the days of Jesus, the expectation was so strong that many mistook other figures for him. When John the Baptist preached in the wilderness, clothed in rough garments and feeding on wild honey, the crowds thought he was Elijah returned.
Are you Elijah? I am not.
John denied being Elijah in person, but Jesus explained that his ministry carried the same spirit and mission, to prepare the way of the Lord. Elijah had confronted kings and called a wandering people back to the covenant. John did the same. He spoke with boldness, called for repentance, and announced the nearness of the kingdom of God.
And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who was to come.
That statement did not erase the future promise. Jesus later clarified that Elijah would indeed come again. With this, the mystery remained open. John had come in the spirit and power of Elijah, but the prophecy of Elijah's return still awaited its final fulfillment. Even in other moments, the name of Elijah arose spontaneously. When Jesus cried out from the cross, some thought he was calling the prophet. The expectation was so alive that in the people's minds, Elijah could appear at any moment, even in the most unexpected.
Elijah was more than a memory. His name was at the heart of every hope. They mentioned him at Passovers. They looked for him in the desert when John preached, and even at the cross of Jesus they thought he might appear. That expectation shows the strength of the promise: Elijah must return.
The hope of his return also shaped how Israel understood history. Elijah was seen as the bridge between what was and what was to come. His return would not only announce the end, but also reconciliation. Fathers and children united, hearts restored, a people prepared. His figure transcended time. In Jewish tradition, Elijah is the invisible guest at every Passover. In Christian faith, he is the prophet still to appear in God's final plans. His mystery unites both: a man who never died and whose mission is not yet complete.
When the Lord comes to judge, it will not be sudden. Elijah will come first to announce it. So, my parents believed, and so I believe.
The promise of his return ensured Elijah never disappeared. In the memory of the people, at every Passover table, in the words of the prophets and in the teachings of Jesus, his name appears as a herald of what is to come. Elijah, the prophet of fire, was not buried in the past. His story opened in the whirlwind and projected forward. For many, his return will be the sign that the end has come and that the day of the Lord is at the door. Elijah did not die. His absence left open a question that echoed through generations: will he return? The book of Revelation describes a scenario where his figure seems to reappear. 2 witnesses are sent to Jerusalem in the midst of the Great Tribulation. Their presence divides the entire world. The witnesses prophesy for 1,260 days. They do not come with diplomacy, but with words of judgment. Their voices shake multitudes, their signs move nations. They have the power to shut the heavens so that it does not rain, and to strike the earth with plagues.
I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. They have power to shut the sky, so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophecy.
The description cannot be overlooked. Shutting the sky was the sign that distinguished Elijah before King Ahab. The prophet who once humbled the priests of Baal appears reflected in this vision, not against a local kingdom, but against the entire world. That is why, since ancient times, many have believed that one of the 2 witnesses will be him.
I saw them in the square, preaching where no one dares. Their clothes were rough, their voices firm. Soldiers tried to seize them, but stepped back in fear. People whispered, "It's Elijah. He has returned to speak again."
In life, Elijah faced the wrath of a queen and the silence of a divided people. In Revelation, the opposition will be greater. The nations will hate the witnesses, but they will not be able to harm them until their mission is complete. Jerusalem will become the epicenter of global tension. Some will fall to their knees, others will celebrate their rejection.
The Lord speaks through them. Silence them, we don't want to hear.
The sacred text anticipates a brutal outcome. When their mission is complete, the beast that rises from the abyss will conquer them and kill them. Their bodies will lie in the streets of Jerusalem, and the nations will look upon them. Instead of mourning, there will be celebration. The world will exchange gifts as if it had triumphed over God himself. But that apparent victory will be brief. After 3.5 days, the Spirit of life will enter them. In full view of all, they will rise to their feet. Terror will seize the crowd. A voice will resound from heaven, "Come up here," and they will ascend in a cloud before everyone.
They're rising. They're alive before us.
The irony is profound. The prophet who never knew death will face it, only to conquer it. His resurrection will not be defeat. It will be the confirmation that his mission remains under God's power. What happened in the whirlwind of his ascension now becomes a sign on a global scale. God raises up his servants even before unbelieving eyes.
Elijah is the only prophet whose story has no ending. He did not die. He was taken. That is why many see him in the prophecy of the two witnesses. His signs are the same: shutting the sky, calling fire, confronting power. He is the bridge between what has already happened and what is still to come.
The expectation is not limited to the future. Today, Jerusalem is the center of political and spiritual tensions. Its walls, its streets, its plazas are watched by the nations. And in the midst of it all, Elijah's name is heard again, not only in temples and synagogues, but in everyday conversations, in whispered prayers, in the hope of those who await the promise.
Lord, send your prophet. Let Elijah come soon.
Elijah's figure also appears in key moments of the New Testament. At the Transfiguration, Jesus was seen with Moses and Elijah. For many, it was a vision of what is to come, the fulfillment of the law and the prophets in the Messiah. For others, it was a preview of Elijah's final mission in the last days. His name cannot be separated from the future. Even more, today's technology makes ancient visions seem more possible than ever. Revelation spoke of nations watching the bodies of the witnesses. Today, a single device streams live from Jerusalem to the entire world. What once seemed impossible is now everyday reality. The stage is set. Elijah was the prophet of fire on Carmel, the man of silence on Horeb, the one taken up in the whirlwind. In Revelation, he appears again as a witness in the midst of judgment. His life never closed with an ending, and his return will not be nostalgia. It will be a warning. Scripture sums it up with a solemn phrase: "I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord." His mission is not over. It is part of the future. Elijah, the prophet who never tasted death, rises again in the vision of Revelation as the herald of the end. If the promise is true, his return is closer than we imagine. Fire once fell at his word. A whirlwind once carried him beyond the grave. But prophecy declares his mission is still unfinished. And if the prophet of fire is destined to walk among us again, are we ready to see him return?